From Interfaith Alliance, this is The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President Reverend Paul Brandeis Raushenbush in Washington, D.C. On October 18th, Interfaith Alliance presented a briefing on Capitol Hill. The title of the briefing was Banned Beliefs: How People of Diverse Faiths Are Fighting to Protect Our Public Schools and Libraries. The panel was comprised of the honorary host, Congressman Jamie Raskin, Tracy D. Hall, former Executive Director of the American Library Association, Anisha Singh, Executive Director of the Sikh Coalition, and Cameron Samuels, co-founder of Students Engaged in Advancing Texas. We are growing the state of belief, building on our 17-year history by partnering with Religion News Service. And as part of the RNS family of podcasts, there's a next generation, the State of Belief podcast that I want to make sure you are subscribed to. Please visit stateofbelief.com/new podcast. It would really help to have you subscribe and to tell people you're close to about the conversations you are hearing. The State of Belief is made possible in great part by the generous support of our listeners. If you made a donation, thank you for helping keep these conversations heard by more people who need them. If you haven't pitched in yet, information on how you can keep this show on the air is available at stateofbelief.com. And you can find out more about the work of Interfaith Alliance and join us at interfaithalliance.org. And now, here's part one of Banned Beliefs: How People of Diverse Faiths Are Fighting to Protect Our Public Schools and Libraries.
I feel strongly about this issue because I think that we need more politicians reading books and fewer politicians banning books. So I am thrilled that Interfaith Alliance has picked this up. Somewhat counterintuitively as a cause, but I think it's great. Censorship of books, censorship of curriculum, censorship of teachers, censorship of ideas and free speech and free discourse are always an exercise of power, and they're nothing that leads to the moral or spiritual improvement of society. And I'll give you a good example of that. About a month ago, I think it was, one of my colleagues in the House Oversight Committee, Marjorie Taylor Greene, decided to display pornography in our hearing room in a hearing that was putatively about whether there was political interference in the Hunter Biden investigation. So she showed some pornographic pictures that allegedly came from the hard drive of Hunter Biden, although we don't know because we've never seen the hard drive of his computer. But anyway, there was I couldn't see it myself because I didn't have my glasses on, but I was sitting next to AOC and I said, well, Alex, what is that? She said, I think those are pictures of live sex acts going on. And so there was an uproar in our hearing room, and Lauren Boebert actually came up to me and said, like, this is outrageous. I said, I know, because somebody's got to do something about the fanaticism and extremism that have been let in the land, Lauren. But I went up to Marjorie Taylor Greene and I said, Marjorie, if those pictures had been in a book, you would have banned the book. But you just showed them to everybody. It struck me that, because, in both cases, banning a book because you don't like the message or the content or the pictures or whatever is an exercise in power. And so is showing pictures is an exercise in power if you think that's going to be to your advantage. And, we need to stand up for the values of freedom of expression, freedom of discourse, and, as Reverend Raushenbush was saying, actual intellectual exchange and learning. And by the way, one of the things that we learn a lot when we read books and articles from different perspectives is about the complexity and the conflicts within particular traditions, within particular faiths, within particular histories. You don't just get some kind of rah-rah PRism. You understand the complexity of people coming from different kinds of communities and histories. And so all of that is extinguished and flattened out by censorship. So anyway, I think it's great what you guys are doing, and I thank you for standing up for freedom of speech and its closely connected value, freedom of religious worship. And one of my colleagues who was posing as a big champion of religion got up to say the other day, well, the moral downfall of America was in 1962 in Engel versus Vitale when the Supreme Court banned prayer in the public schools. And I had to rise to remind them the Supreme Court never banned prayer in the public schools. As long as there are pop math quizzes, there will be prayer in the public schools. Anyone can pray whenever he or she wants to pray. It's just that the government can't dictate that you must pray or must pray in a particular way. That is a hard-fought principle of religious freedom in our history, which, again, is imperiled during these times of increasing censorship and authoritarianism. So I'm going to hang out for as long as I can to hear these great panelists, and thank you very much for being here, everybody.
Thank you very much, Representative Raskin. We are so glad. This is an extraordinary group of people, and I am so excited to introduce them to you. First, we will hear from Tracy D. Hall, who was most recently the Executive Director of the American Library Association, which she led since 2020. She has a background ranging from hands-on librarian to work at the Joyce Foundation and the City of Chicago. Tracy's background includes serving as assistant dean at Dominican University, all of which is to say she has seen the power of words, of literacy, of books from many angles, and also sees the threat of banned books and banned beliefs as well. I'm going to introduce all three of you, and then we can go one by one. I did want to mention one of our panelists, who is a wonderful woman named Amberine Khan, who is a interfaith leader and also a woman who has kids in the Maryland Public School and has been very active there, wanted to be with us. She has a family emergency, something dear to her heart, and so she is very sorry not to be with us, but we keep her in our thoughts and are so grateful for the work that she does. Next on our panel is Anisha Singh, Executive Director of the Sikh Coalition, a first-generation Sikh America. Anisha is an attorney and civil rights leader with more than 15 years of experience in public interest and social justice issues, legal and policy advocacy work, and grassroots organizing. Prior to her role at the Sikh Coalition, she served as Director of Judiciary and Democracy Affairs at Planned Parenthood Federation of America and has worked at several positions at the Center for American Progress. Welcome. And finally, Cameron Samuels, a student leader who is currently a sophomore at Brandeis University. As a high school student, Cameron organized efforts against book bans and LGBTQ internet censorship in their home state of Texas. And Samuel now organizes a coalition called Students Engaged in Advancing Texas, SEAT, to demonstrate youth visibility in education policymaking, recently testifying before the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee at a hearing on book bans. I'd like to start with each of you offering an opening statement, and then we'll follow up with questions. Thank you all for being here. And please join me in a round of applause for each of them. We're so grateful for their time.
All right, good morning, everyone. And I definitely want to thank the Interfaith Alliance for bringing us all together. It's wonderful to see this room full. There are a few seats in the front, and I have to take this moment to thank you, Congressman Raskin. You continue to be on the right side of history, and so many of the arguments that I think that are so prescient and important to the preservation of our foundational rights, and chiefly among them, and interconnected, of course, are freedom of religion and freedom of speech. And for me specifically, when I think about freedom of speech, the right to read. So I want to just carry on with, I think, a quote that I think should frame our meeting today, and is, of course, It is by a frequently banned author, Ray Bradbury, and I want us to kind of think about this. He said at the height of his own books being restricted and censored, he said, the problem in our country isn't with books being banned, but with people no longer reading. You don't have to burn books to destroy a culture. Just get people to stop reading them. Now, when I remind you, and I just kicked off with the Toronto Public Library, they have a whole year of really focusing on censorship and the threat of censorship to their democracy. One of the things that they had modeled after Chicago Public Library was a book sanctuary where they had the most frequently banned books all together. And there, right in the center, was the Holy Bible. So I want us to think about that, because I know when we look at the work of the American Library Association, the focus of the campaign uniteagainstbookbans.org is to really allow us to see the role of reading in the preservation of our democracy and why it is so important that we not take this moment lying down. But I also want to speak to something else I think is quite important, especially at this particular moment. In addition to the Bible, the Talmud, as well as the Quran, are also three of the most frequently challenged books. And it is not a coincidence that in 2021, when I got a chance to visit the U.S. Pavilion at the World Expo in Dubai, the Library of Congress had loaned Thomas Jefferson's Quran as the centerpiece of the U.S. Pavilion, because the Quran, as we know, was so important in Jefferson's lodging the arguments that would lead to the Declaration of Independence. And there's so much written about that particular text. So when we come to this moment, I think it is important that we are understanding that we cannot have freedom of religion without freedom of speech. We cannot have freedom of religion without defending the right to read. And if this was not, and this is my last sort of opening statement, and I was talking about this with Paul, as if this were something that I was just conjecturing. I was on a plane yesterday and flying here, and on my row at the end was Mayor Nancy Rotering of Highland Park, Illinois, which, of course, she's a mayor who models what happens when, what national leadership looks like when tragedy strikes a small town in the wake of the shooting that happened in Highland Park. So we're beginning a conversation. She's like, well, what are you doing? And I said, I'm a librarian. I love libraries. She started to talk about how important the library was to their having a discussion in Highland Park about the tragedy. And then comes along a pastor, Pastor Eddie from Janesville, Wisconsin. And as he joins the conversation, we're talking about censorship. We're talking about the place of libraries in combating censorship. And we're also talking about the place of libraries in supporting the freedom of religion and access to religious texts. And he says, yes, I really want to say to congregations who are acting as if stewardship looks like censorship, I want to combat that by quoting Philippians 4:5, which says, let your reasonableness be known to all men. And in that, the Apostle Paul is saying to his disciples, learn to disagree without fighting, for that is a sign of discipleship. So I really want to stop here. I know we'll have other questions and other opportunities to talk more about the connection between freedom of speech, the right to read, and freedom of religion. But I definitely want to underscore what you're saying there, Paul. We cannot act, and I'm saying this as the niece of two pastors. We cannot act as if our Christian stewardship or our faith stewardship is contingent on censorship. It's the exact opposite. We must be fighting for the right to read, for the right specifically to read texts that underscore belief.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful opening. And thank you so much to the Interfaith Alliance for creating this space, especially given the moment we are all in right now. And thank you again, Representative Raskin, for your leadership in the House and just all your hard work in this space as well. My name is Anisha. I'm the Executive Director at the Sikh Coalition. And it's no surprise, the Sikh community is no stranger to what can happen when hatred wins, when hatred is fueled. And one of the things we say often at the Sikh Coalition is ignorance fuels animosity. And that's true today when you see this heightened anxiety and this heightened ignorance and need for ignorance, this fear that is being perpetuated and spread when there's a conversation about banning books that can really grow our knowledge, right? Knowledge is power, and yet there's this effort to stifle that. In the days and weeks and months after 9/11, I was very young, and I was, like so many in my community, just thinking of two kind of identities. One is as an American, just mourning with the country, and another as a Sikh American, kind of grappling with the fact that there was so much ignorance, that people didn't understand who Sikhs were, that people didn't understand who my community was. And I had the privilege before that to not really notice that. And it was, seeing my fellow Sikh classmates being bullied in school. It was seeing that heightened rates and statistics that were coming out of Sikh students being bullied at schools, of hate incidents, of employment discrimination. And the thing that kept coming up is, how do we educate folks? How do we make sure that people really understand who Sikhs are, to talk about the beauty of our religion, to stand in partnership with our Muslim brothers and sisters and other faiths that are also dealing with a similar situation. And that's how the Sikh Coalition was formed. And one of the initial realizations was, we have to educate our students. We have to do that proactive work on the front end to make sure that our youth are being raised to really look to books, look to education, to understand different faiths, to read about different perspectives, to hear directly from individuals from different communities and see their own viewpoints, right? Not from hearsay, but directly from the source. And what better way than through books? And so, why are we here on this panel today, and why are we sitting in this room for this conversation? It's because we truly do believe that there's a direct correlation between allowing individuals, especially young kids, to have the knowledge, to have access to the knowledge and the different perspectives, to shape our narrative and to really understand who communities are, who and how they came into this country, how we live, how we contribute to society, and to, again, fight that ignorance and bring down some of these statistics that we're seeing. Sikhs are constantly ranked in the top groups of people who are victims of hate. Despite our population size, we tend to be in the top 3. And that continues to be the case, and we've seen these waves, and we are in such a moment right now in our history and in our country and in the world where access to books and access to education are more important than ever before. So looking forward to this conversation.
Hi, everyone. I am Cameron. I am a student from Texas. I'm Jewish, and I am non-binary. If we had more books like Congressman Raskin's in Texas, I'm sure our state would be at a much better state right now. We need more books like yours, Congressman, and we need more books that teach students what we need to know. I always grew up loving education. Actually, in kindergarten, interestingly enough, I told my classmates, why couldn't we have school year-round? I just couldn't stop learning. I love learning, and bookstores and libraries were my favorite places as a child. These were places where I could go to learn more about the world and see beyond what was in my peripheral. I could really continue learning and becoming a better person by learning about experiences I'm unfamiliar with, learning about cultures and identities and topics, subjects that I wouldn't necessarily learn about in the classroom, because there's only so much that you can learn in a certain amount of time every day in a classroom. And this was a way for me to engage in higher learning on my own. And unfortunately, not everyone is that way. And censorship is right now an affront to identity. Censorship is about the status quo. It's about free expression. It's about what is acceptable and what is not. Who dictates the narrative? Who controls what the status quo is? And right now, that status quo is one that is very restricted, that is keeping many people marginalized because of identity, because of faith, because of these inherent characteristics that we have as humans that certain people just simply disagree with. But law is very arbitrary, and we can shatter it in months of organizing. It just took 3 months in my school district to build this movement where I had spoken at a school board meeting calling to light the censorship because I felt compelled to stand up as a student. Well, I should have been learning in the classroom, spending my Monday night doing homework, honestly, or just having fun with my family and friends. I was instead at a school board meeting and standing up for my rights as a student, for my freedom to read, and for my identity as someone who is non-binary, who uses they, them pronouns, and is queer. That was the topic of conversation at a school board meeting that should have been focused on the student achievement, but instead they were focused on identity politics. And this, just 3 months later, looked drastically different, where I had been the only student in the room and the only person on this side calling to light censorship and standing up for the freedom to read. We instead had a room filled with supporters 3 months later. And that has continued on month after month that spring of my senior year in high school. This was in spring of 2022. This was a movement that we built as students and now has grown into Students Engage in Advancing Texas, where we're demanding a seat at the table in decisions that directly affect us every day in classrooms and our future. Censorship affects our futures. And that's exactly why we are organizing and unfortunately have been organizing. We shouldn't have been compelled to do this, but we need that support. We need others to be joining us in that fight. And that's what motivates me every day, because I know that this is a community that we're building in this work. This is a community that we are relying on each other for support when the status quo keeps us marginalized. And there is never a time that we should be looking away, because Heinrich Heine, poet philosopher in the 1800s, said that wherever they burn books, in the end, they will burn people. And we saw just decades later that actually happened in the Holocaust. And we are seeing that continue just decades and decades, the Comstock laws. We saw in the 80s with again, and just again and again and again. And we are seeing this continue in the present day. And it's most definitely about identity. And as someone of Jewish faith, I am very compelled to pursue justice where it matters, to show up where these decisions are being made. Because if I am not doing it, then who will? That is our belief as Jewish people. If not us, then who? And I think that's a message that I want to carry into this panel, as we are such great, amazing panelists who have such great perspectives, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what we all have to say.
I want to give Representative Raskin the opportunity, if he wants to follow up with anything that he just heard. You've given us an opening statement, but do you have any questions or inquiries, or I hand the moderator mic to you for a moment and see what has struck you about what you've heard so far.
Well, I thank you, Paul. I appreciate that very much. I'm just impressed about where the interfaith community is based on all of these contributions, because the original attacks on free speech in our country were the blasphemy laws. The idea of people
speaking outside of an orthodox religious view or perspective. And now it's so impressive to hear, all of our panelists talk about how fundamentally important it is to people's expression and development of faith that they be able to write the books they want to write and read the books that they want to read. It reinforces my sense that a lot of what is being censored is speech that encourages people to think for themselves. I remember when I was a kid reading Chaim Potok's book called The Chosen, that was a book about a kid who was kind of stifled and bristling under the constrictions of religion. And so, it's not just that it would have exposed other kids who are not Jewish to what it was like to be growing up Jewish, but also to look at the internal conflicts within a particular religious faith and the things that people go through. And that is something that establishes a lot of commonality and affinity among people, because religion's a really important part of life, and it gives a lot of meaning to people, but it's also something that people struggle with too. And that is something that is revealed through the process of literature and self-reflection. So I enjoyed very much everybody's thoughts about this, and I'd be curious to hear more about Texas, about what was the nature of the attacks that were going on. Was it at the local level or at the state level, and where did that come from? I mean, when I read these long lists of banned books in Texas, I just wonder, who came up with those lists, and did they read the books or did they not read the books? Because it's, in my mind, it's kind of a conundrum. If they've read the books, they're basically saying it's okay for them to read the books. They just don't want anybody else to read the books. And if they haven't read the books, why are they censoring them in the first place? So
What I like about that question is it's about like how do we mobilize to counteract, and recognize what is happening across the country, and then how do we, as people of diverse beliefs and faith, mobilize in greater intensity, greater strategic acumen, and success to counteract this. And because I think, I truly believe that we are on the American side of this, and that we are on the side that the vast majority of American people agree with. Can you talk a little bit about some of the ways that you've seen the response to book bans, and if there's any wisdom that you have specifically for an effective way that religious communities might be part of the reason we're doing this is to figure out what would be effective, and you've had a front row seat, so maybe you could offer us some wisdom in that area.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to call out some of my colleagues here, now former from the American Library Association, if they can raise their hands, because I think that, thank you. I think that libraries have always been on the front lines, of conversations like this. But I also think that this is a moment that we cannot take lying down. When I go back and I look at the McCarthy era under Senator Joseph McCarthy, where we saw 30,000 books banned or burned, that inspired 70 years ago President Eisenhower to say, don't join the book burners, right? I think about this specifically, I would say to the faith community, don't sit this conversation out. Because this is a conversation that is using censorship as a Trojan horse for other planned encumbrances and circumscriptions of foundational human rights. And we see that. We see that. We also see a lot of the legislation in states and in municipalities. A lot of this is happening at the state level, for sure. To speak back to Congressman Raskin, where is this happening? A lot at the state level is moving down to municipal levels. Obviously, you know, it looks like it's a grassroots effort, but it's not coming from the grassroots. It's very much organized. You know, there's a lot, you know, that could be said there. But I think really what's important is that we really fight this at a grassroots level. We really need our right to read right now. But there are a couple of things that I'm noticing that are really, really effective. One is speaking up. We need faith communities, and we need anyone who understands what is happening to speak up and not to be silent. That silence is what allowed a majority of people who, like today, more than 70% of people, regardless of political party, recognize that censorship is a violation of our human rights and our foundational constitutional rights. We understand that. But at the same time, there are so many people who are waiting for someone else to stand up and rescue, right? Come to the rescue. We need everyone in this room right now to do a couple of things. One is to let people know that you are here today, and to let people know that you believe that free people read freely, which is one of the ideals of the American Library Association, and I think is foundational to American librarianship. The second thing is to support any place where books are being banned. Support your school and public libraries. Schools are really under it. They are under attack, and as is public education. So let's understand that. And again, when I say that censorship is a Trojan horse, it is because I am watching legislation around censorship precede legislation to defund public libraries, like we're seeing the defunding of a lot of public service institutions. And today, libraries are the most visited public service institution in the country. So also support your local bookstores, because we're beginning to see a lot of censorship attempts or people confiscating books at especially independent bookstores. The third thing is read the books. Right? We know that today there are a significant number of people who are not reading a full book after they graduate either high school or college. And so reading, just that sort of like fluency, civic fluency, idea fluency, civic literacy is needed. The reason why we're arguing and attacking and turning so violent is because we no longer have a tolerance for other ideas. And why? Because we are shopping alone. You know, we are shopping online. We're not waiting in line at the store. We're not going into places where we could come into contact with somebody who might be different from us. So we should be reading together. In my community, in my neighborhood in Chicago, we've formed a banned book club, which is bringing a lot of neighbors out to read together and into each other's living room. I've met more people in my neighborhood through the Banned Books Club than ever. I'm telling you, I'm like, oh man, you know, and I know the dogs too and some of the cats. But the other thing I would say again is support organizations like the American Library Association, like PEN America, organizations that are on the front lines of this. And also go to uniteagainstbookbans.org. Sign up for weekly reminders of things that you can do. And lastly, write letters to the editor, and please follow and track anytime you see a hearing about book banning happening. Go there and be there. Let people know, because you know what's happening is a room is being flooded with people who have not read the book. And I've attended a lot of online hearings and some in-person hearings, and I can almost repeat it. I know exactly when they're going to say, I haven't read the book, but please, I mean, we don't want that to stay. I mean, that is such an opt-out, and it's so embarrassing, and the rest of the world is watching. So it looks like, it almost looks like we are throwing giving away our democracy to people who are not informed. And I really can say this. The fact is, people are not reading these books. People are being sent copied and pasted lists of books with just the passage that people think are offensive, and saying, don't you think that you should go to X, Y, and Z, to your school board or to your public library board and ban these books? And people who feel like, I do want to get involved. Is this what stewardship looks like? You know, they're taken by that. They're swayed. They're persuaded to do that. And they're standing up and they're banning books. Some sometimes the highest works of literature, and they haven't read them. We cannot let that stand. So those are just some things that we can do. And I definitely want to say I'm seeing faith communities. One of the greatest pastors living, Otis Moss Jr., actually wrote a wonderful article that I read last year, really talking about, at the beginning of this year now, really talking about why it is a requirement of our faith that we stand against censorship. And so I also think we should look to some of the great religious teachers of this moment.
Great. I appreciate that. Also, there are churches that have banned book clubs. There are others. So faith communities can actually be a leader here. More of Banned Beliefs, How People of Diverse Faiths Are Fighting to Protect Our Public Schools and Libraries is coming right up. If you miss any part of today's program, you can hear full episodes of The State of Belief anytime on our website at stateofbelief.com. And make sure you subscribe to the Next Generation podcast at stateofbelief.com/new podcast. That's stateofbelief.com/new podcast. You're listening to State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet.
I'm Roxy Stone.
And I'm Caitlin Beatty.
Saved by the City is a podcast from two Christian women cracking the code of faith from the mean streets of New York City.
Our podcast captures what happens when purity culture meets hookup culture, when distraction steals from devotion, and when the diversity of viewpoints and lifestyles clash against assumptions.
Gotham can be a weird place for Christian women, but we're out there, and we have stories to tell.
Saved by the City, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Welcome back to State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President Reverend Paul Brandeis Raushenbush. You're hearing our Capitol Hill briefing from earlier this month titled Banned Beliefs, How People of Diverse Faiths Are Fighting to Protect Our Public Schools and Libraries, featuring honorary host Congressman Jamie Raskin, Tracy Hall, former Executive Director of American Library Association, Anisha Singh, Executive Director of the Sikh Coalition, and Cameron Samuels, co-founder of the Students Engaged in Advancing Texas. The Sikh Coalition is doing amazing work on this, about making sure that information is available about Sikh life, and that there is a strategy about erasing it. And so it's so important what you're doing. So can you tell a little bit more about the strategy that the Sikh Coalition has developed?
Yeah, thank you. I mentioned this in my opening, but again, after 9/11, one of the pillars that we started thinking about in our work was how do we educate folks? And for the last 15 plus years, we have successfully added Sikhi to state standards in 17 states plus DC. To our knowledge, we're the only organization that has successfully been able to do that, and that is through coalition, right? When we're hearing about potential proactive legislation that is being introduced, I'll give you a really specific example. In New York earlier this year, there was legislation that was being proposed and written in the state legislature for AAPI history inclusion in state standards and funding behind that too, which is critically important. And so a lot of that work, we joined a coalition of partners throughout the AAPI community. And, the Sikh community is in this place between race, religion, and ethnicity based on our identity and just the challenges our community has faced over the last 22 years. And so we were able to sit in that coalition, bring that perspective and bring some of our experience working on state standards in other states to really build out some of that work. And it's no different than any other work that we do, right? As organizers, as advocates, it's bringing people together. It's going to lobby with your state legislators about the bill and the importance of the bill. It's getting community members to show up for those lobby visits. It's getting them to sign on to a letter, or creating a what we call P2A, phone to action, right? Having people call their members of Congress or their state legislators, depending on the bill, and getting your voice out there, and getting diverse voices out there, interfaith, right, interracial voices that really can speak to the importance of that legislation. Yeah. There's two ways about this too, right? There's the reactive. There are a lot of harmful legislation out there right now, federally and in states, that are trying to ban books, that are trying to silence minority communities. And how are we making those calls and getting folks activated and creating these coalitions that are strong voices against those? But also, how are we paying attention to those bills that are being proposed, or the potential to ask your state legislators to propose bills, to help them draft that language so we can proactively make sure that our schools are teaching about our various backgrounds and religions and faiths and racial history as well. When we're in a situation where there's anti-critical race theory narratives going on, there's book banning, that kind of proactive efforts and the coalition building is more important than ever.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. We don't have to be reactive. We can be proactive. We can reach out to one another. No one will do this alone. It will happen because we work together. And so I also want to acknowledge our friend from PEN America who is here, and thank PEN America for being such a great partner, along with the American Library Association, to Interfaith Alliance and our work in this area. I also want to just along the lines of what Anisha was saying, please, you have outside, there is a QR code about the legislation that Representative Raskin introduced into Congress. It is so important that you do that QR code. Show your support for this bill. It's an example of being proactive and working to ensure and show that we are not going to accept banned books. I want to ask one more question of Cameron, and this is a sensitive question, because it was one of the, I would say, the most grotesque things I've seen recently in the chambers. But Cameron, you recently wonderfully testified at the Senate Judiciary Committee on book bans. And then Senator Kennedy of Louisiana read what appeared to be highly offensive content from books with LGBTQ content without context. And he seemed to indicate that anyone who was speaking up was supporting or pushing pornography. And it was grotesque. And there was no one in the chamber who knew how to respond to it, unfortunately, which was a grave mistake. And I just really appreciate, you were in the room. Could you tell us a little bit about how that played out? Some of the knowledge that you wish you could have imparted to the senators who were in the room, and something about how that can prepare all of us for these grotesque moments.
Senator Kennedy. So this has been an age-long issue, conflating what is high school material intended for audiences of a particular age, stage in life, and conflating that to what would be hypothetically in elementary school libraries, considering that age inappropriate. And that really overlooks age relevancy and discredits educators, because these books that were mentioned don't show up in these elementary school libraries. Educators know that because they're not intended for those audiences. I would be so flabbergasted if someone in elementary school were reading those books, because they are not age relevant to elementary school students in that matter. And many of these books weren't even in my school library to begin with. These books touch on tough topics that are so important to learn, and many students might not be ready for them, but when they are, it should be their judgment. Students need that right to read protected by school district policies, and that should not interfere with their ability to read. Certain people in the community, but really what we're seeing is those lists of hundreds of banned books being pushed by interest groups and politicians, driving this concerted effort to ban books. That's what we're really seeing. And this has become a battle over who can decide for everyone what is allowed in schools, what students are able to read. And Senator Kennedy was indeed fear-mongering, stoking fear of books that people, especially I'm sure him, had not read. People haven't read these books but are taking for granted what politicians are saying are in these books. If they read them for themselves, they would realize that those quotes that he shared were supposed to make someone feel uncomfortable. It was a scene about abuse, or it was a text message that made someone feel uncomfortable. I'm sure many of you have received text messages like that possibly. And how do you react to that? How do you respond to it? How will that carry with you for the rest of your life? And these books can give you words for trauma. These books can give you words to relate to explain to yourself and to others. This is so important to know, and by gatekeeping books in school libraries, students will not learn about these tough topics. We lose that literacy to be able to be exceptional leaders in society, to be well-cultured, and to be the amazing people that we can all be if we actually read books after high school, if we read books and actually learned the value that comes from them. So there's a lot that can be done from that response, because that's continuing. That's this winning message. They have this winning message, and how do we respond with it? There can be a faith response. Faith leaders and communities can respond by reading these books and understanding before we actually make decisions about them. We need more understanding. Anyone can have an opinion for or against. People can banter. They can concur. This is something that happens, but that opinion might be so frivolous if we don't have that understanding.
One of the things that you said when you were in that setting, you told me, was that was not the first time someone had pulled that stunt on you. So you were like ready for it. You can bring, if anybody has any questions, we're going to just have a minute for like maybe one or two questions. So I just think being ready for things like that, understanding that context matters. And I just want to share personally, like I have two children who are in elementary school, and I have a husband, and they have a wonderful life, and we are so blessed that at our elementary school, they learn about different families, and it's not a deal. No one is pushing any gay agenda. They're just making the other people aware in the school that, there's like different kinds of people at the school, and everybody's welcome. And the effort to say, like, don't say gay to young people just does really erase my family and my and our work, and also as parents, but also the work of our church, which baptized our children, where we show up and they're in a lamb costume and for the Christmas play. But it doesn't allow that existence even it can be an option, and it exists. So all of these things about just erasing stories, it is erasing life. And I want to impress upon you that this is a religious issue. We have to take it very, very seriously. I think we have maybe time for one question. Do we, Darcy, can you bring up a question and we'll offer it. I'm sorry we don't have time for more, but all of you know that you can reach out to us at interfaithalliance.org. We are here for you, and we really look forward to being partners with you in the future. Okay, I'm gonna read this because it's like it's a whole thing, and I think it might be a great thing to end on. German pastor Martin Niemöller famously wrote, "If they came first for the communists and I did not speak out because I was not a communist, then they came for the unionists, and then they came for the Jews, and then they came for me." This famous quote about when do you speak up? Do you see parallels in the targeting of books by and for about various communities for censorship today? I think that's like a perfect question for each of you to respond to as a way to close. Yeah, great.
So this is a question about identity, right? So yes, we've seen this history play out so many times over decades and decades and decades, and it's continuing. And yet, once again, we are in this tumultuous time. We are in this pivotal moment of democracy where censorship is so undemocratic because it's about suppressing those that differ from the status quo, who are the ones who are the odd ones out, like I was. School. I was the odd one out in school, the one who actually loved to learn, the one who this and that was Jewish, the society in school was not shaped to support my faith. I always had to get unexcused absences for religious holidays, and there were no gender-neutral bathrooms. And so by erasing this history, by erasing our voices, we are no longer in a pluralistic democracy where we can't hear from those we need to hear from most. It's about silence. And that's why censorship is so undemocratic.
Thank you.
That was beautifully said. I'll add, the Sikh community, South Asian community, Arab communities, we've been considered perpetual foreigners, right? And whether you look at the way the media portrays us, whether you look at the way narratives are being just hashed out, we're also the first to be considered a terrorist, right? And so when you're looking at those narratives, it is so critically important that we have something to combat that, and that is books, right? That is these voices and these firsthand experiences that we can read about, we can talk about, we can lift up, so that we're not, to your point, erasing these stories and allowing others to speak for us and create our own history and narrate our own history. And I'll leave with this, which is, I truly do think that, especially in this moment, it's about the solidarity that we can bring together.
Yes.
One of the things that is so moving to me is when 9/11 happened and the misconception that Sikhs were Muslims was one of the main reasons that we were falling victim to hate. We did not turn away from our brothers and sisters in the Muslim community and say, we are not them. We got closer, we locked arms, and we worked together. And now we have one of the strongest coalitions because over 20 years, we have been working with the Muslim, South Asian, Arab communities to build our work together. And our voice and our work and our progress has been stronger for it. And I think now more than ever, we need to be reminded of that we cannot do this in silos. That's what they want. And that is why they are taking away our voices, because without that coalition, without that solidarity piece, we cannot be louder than them. And so really want to emphasize that important piece, coming together, look to your left, look to your right, as they say, right? And how do we have something in common where we can fight for this together, because this is our moment.
I want to just end with that. This is our moment, right? I'm reminded so much, especially coming into DC yesterday. I was just reminded so much of Dr. King, right? And what Dr. King reminds us is that if we are going to pursue freedom, we must see everyone's freedom as inextricably bound with ours, right? And so we are definitely seeing assaults on women and people of color and people, religious majorities and minorities. We are seeing also too attacks on the rights of young people to determine their identity and their future. And so I think that this quote is such an important one to end with. I do want to say this, and it's just a personal story because I'm thinking about my grandmother. My grandmother was so religious, she didn't even allow us to use the dice when we played Monopoly or any of those kinds of games. We had to just make some number cards and just pull like randomly there but the one place that she would go besides church all the time. It is the reason why I became a librarian. It's because she believed in the right to read. She was denied that opportunity growing up in the rural South in the era of either no libraries or segregated libraries, which is why I keep coming back to libraries. But my grandmother believed that we should be able to choose what we wanted to read, and she allowed that. So she didn't allow the dice. But she allowed me to choose the books that I wanted to read. So I just want to make sure that I honor my grandmother, Bessie, because my grandmother is right here saying, yes, these two rights are connected, and we must never forget that, and we cannot let them be eroded.
Please join me in thanking all of our panelists. Thank you three so much. I just really appreciate all your wisdom and to all of you for being here with us. Very grateful to Representative Raskin for being with us for so long. By the way, that's a long time for a congressman to stay. And so that was really, really wonderful and a testimony to this panel and to all of you. I want to urge all of you to join with us and let us join with you to lift up our voice and tell policymakers that people of faith do not support censorship. We have a library of resources on our website. Please go. And we have that action alert that I mentioned earlier. Please, as you leave, do sign that action alert and contact the members of Congress. And I just want to also say that this is something dear to all of us. There is so much going on in the world. And so I just encourage all of us in this moment to listen to one another, to try to love one another, to try to maintain connection with people who are different from us. One of the best ways we can do that is read the narratives of people who may differ from us. And so I just invite us to use this exercise that we did this morning to also move us into a better place in this country and the world as we face the challenges we face. So thank all of you for coming here, and thank again to these three great panelists. And that's all the time we have for the State of Belief this week. You've been hearing the Interfaith Alliance Capitol Hill briefing from earlier this month titled Banned Beliefs, How People of Diverse Faiths Are Fighting to Protect Our Public Schools and Libraries, featuring honorary host Congressman Jamie Raskin, Tracy D. Hall, former Executive Director of the American Library Association, Anisha Singh, Executive Director of the Sikh Coalition, and Cameron Samuels, co-founder of Students Engaged in Advancing Texas. Please be sure to subscribe to the new and improved podcast called The State of Belief at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform, or at stateofbelief.com/new podcast. Subscribe to The State of Belief today. We need your help keeping the State of Belief going. I hope you'll consider being a partner in this crucial work by making a financial contribution today. Information on how to donate is available at stateofbelief.com. That's stateofbelief.com. And if you're getting something out of this show, share it with your family and friends. Let's get more people listening and keep these conversations going when the show is over. Follow us at Facebook and Instagram at State of Belief, and share the State of Belief with the people in your networks. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of Religion News Service or Religion News Foundation. The State of Belief is produced by Ray Kirstein and is a production of Interfaith Alliance. Become a member today at interfaithalliance.org. And be sure to join us next week. I can't wait. Until then, I'm Reverend Paul Brandeis Raushenbush on The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet.